We have with us the chief designer for IK Multimedia, Davide Barbi, and legendary mix and producer engineer, Huart. And you guys are going to talk about the Axio, which is the new audio interface designed with the guitarist in mind.
David, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Do you like my Barry Manilow headset? I think it's
Very
rather
nice.
cool, isn't it?
You can even dance with that.
I could. If I could actually dance. Yes. I got this, I suppose, just a few days ago and had a little bit of playing around with it. I think for a guitar players, the number one thing is always latency, and latency,
Right.
of which I will assure you there is none. None perceivable. And having a lot of fun and playing around with it. I asked you specifically, actually, to choose what you thought was good, rather than doing the sort of like, give me the ultra metal tone, infinite sustain. Because one of the differentiators I've found with these units, whether they be, frankly, either the plug-in or an emulator that's a piece of hardware, one of the biggest differentiators is the clean/crunch, the subtle crunch. That is almost, in many virtual amps, impossible to do. It seems to be clean, metal. It's
critical. Yeah.
It's critical because when you think of, as a producer, if I go into a room with guys like Tim Pierce, obviously we all know, I think he's the most recorded session guitar player. When I go to him, he sets his amp like this. It's like just a bit of crunch.
Yeah.
So that he can just, if he wants, be clean. And just... That is a big differentiator with this. So it means that this is going to play to a lot of different people, not just the rock guys and not just like a clean jazz guy. There's a lot more room, because that is a big secret for those of you that produce guitar, is to get a tone that is very, very responsive to the fingers or the pick, not an on-off situation.
Right.
So, how did you do that?
Yeah. Thanks, Warren. What we are hearing now is a combination, of course, of the Axio audio interface feeding your guitar signal into the software emulation of the amplifiers. I think both the elements are equally important.
Sure.
Because if you have great modeling, I'm sure everybody of you now knows Amplitube since many years. Of course, it's great modeling stuff. But if you feed that with a signal that is not pristine, that is not totally preserving the quality of the instrument, then it's lost.
Yeah, but what's great about this is an Indonesian-made ESP. My guess is it's not thousands of dollars. And it plays beautifully, but it's not a particularly expensive guitar. It's going into here. With this, I think, is something we really should be talking about. The Z-tone here, the ability to adjust the impedance on here to match the guitar.
This is one of the specific points of this interface, that is a very high-quality audio interface with the specific thing of having been designed with the guitar player in mind. So what is going to be connected here by a guitar player? A guitar, of course. And the typical IZ input that you find on all the audio interfaces, they are all the same. They play very nicely, but they are not specifically made for the electric guitar. That's why instead here we added a few original things on instrument channel 1, on instrument input channel 1, where you can actually interact with the guitar to make it sounding slightly different depending on the conditions here. And one of the controls is what Warren was mentioning, is called Z-tone. Basically, it's a variable impedance that you can load the guitar with. When it's fully left like this, it's like a regular IZ instrument input, so 1 mega ohm, and the pickups are not loaded, basically, so they are playing as they would play when they are open. But as soon as you try, you go down with the impedance, so moving the potentiometer up, then the pickups are loaded with the slightly lower impedance, not drastically lower, but slightly, and this makes the tone to change in a very interesting way, because it's changing differently depending on the instrument. So, for example, I start from fully open, it's becoming bolder,
Yeah.
thicker,
A
because
lot more body, a lot more low end, a lot more warmth, a lot more mids, low mids.
yeah, and it's because the pickups are loaded, so it's not like an equalization that I might have added afterwards.
Sure.
But it's actually.
Well, I think EQs in general tend to, if I turn up 100 hertz on anything, whether it be a guitar, a microphone, or whatever,
Yeah.
you often hear, 100 just got dumped up. This is more of like the whole sound gets that sort of warmth added to it.
Yes,
Yeah.
because it's actually changing the way the tone is going to be generated at the source, because it's loading the pickups. So the pickups are actually giving a different output signal from the source. And
It's fantastic.
That's
I think that's a huge differentiator. And then there's a couple of other little controls here.
Yes.
Like, tell us a little bit about this to the right here, the Pure and the JFET.
yes, this is a switch that is actually making the guitar signal to go through two completely different circuitry. One is very, very, very clean, ultra transparent, no sound coloration at all, and it's this one that is called Pure.
Oh yeah, that's lovely.
This is a 117 dBs dynamic range input preamplifier and AD conversion with non-measurable distortion, so it's totally transparent. And then the other circuitry that you can trigger in is called JFET, and with this input, a JFET stage, so sounding sort of tube-like, is added into the signal path, but it's not an emulation of tubes. This is already done in the software, of course. This
Right.
is a physical, additional electronic stage added to the preamp that is adding a slightly amount of coloration, of
Right.
distortion, to make the sound thicker and richer. Since it's not always the best, you can just select between the pure path
Right.
and the JFET path.
I notice it's a measurable difference, but it is definitely a more subtle
It's
difference
subtle.
than the Z-tone, which has
Yes.
got quite a lot of difference between it. Yeah.
Yes.
Fantastic. And then what do we have to the left-hand side? That's just the active
Active
/
or
passive.
passive. Yes. This is because, especially in metal, active pickups are largely used, and they have a very high outputs, and they don't need the additional gain stages that we have here on the passive input.
Sure.
So why having them in line if they are not needed? So
Right.
we decided to make them bypassable. So this is of course a passive guitar, and it's not the proper setting
Right.
for this reason. But if you are using active pickups, you don't need that 10-15 dBs more of gain in line. And
Sure.
so we just bypass the stage for an even cleaner tone and pure signal path straight
Great.
to the AD. So
And active pickups, I'm sure many guitar players in the audience, but active pickups allow you, well, basically have a much better signal-to-noise ratio and rejection. So that's why a lot of guys obviously use them in metal, because they're not going to even go to the light. Oh, this is one position I can stand in without the buzz. Yeah.
yeah,
So
and also for bass. Of course, active bass,
yeah.
it's very, very common.
Yeah.
And you need a lot of transparency also there.
Sure.
So also for bass. Also a very interesting thing for bass is using the Z-tone, because
Yep.
if you connect a passive bass and you turn up the Z-tone, the sound will be much bigger, as if it would go through an amp emulation plugin, or as if it was recorded through
Great.
an amp. So we just, bass tracks usually are recorded very simple way.
Perfect.
DI or almost DI. With this knob, you can make it slightly the right amount of more thickness you need in seconds.
Now you have two independent inputs.
Yes. 2 channels.
Yep.
All the 2 channels can have instrument, line, and microphone inputs at the back.
Great.
Uh,
I mean, and that's the big thing, obviously talking about how wonderful it is for guitar players. It's an I/O aimed towards a guitar player, but of course you can use it in every other situation.
Right.
So if it so happens that your instrument of choice is guitar, great. But of course it's still an I/O that we can use.
It's the perfect interface for the guitar player running a studio inside the computer. And of course, they also need to record bass, guitar, keyboards, everything, vocals. The mic preamp, by the way, is amazing. It's a pure mic preamp. We call them this circuitry. The signal-to-noise ratio is close to the non-measurable limits. So yes, it's specifically thought for guitar players, but it's not only for that, because you need also to be able to record from microphones, of course. And yeah.
Is it, you know what, I don't remember. Can I run it straight from USB?
No.
Or is it separate power
No,
supply?
you need a standard
Doesn't
power.
matter though. I mean, it's so small and portable. I mean, it weighs, look,
It cannot run from USB because it's running very warm.
very warm. But
And-
I think the only reason why I'm mentioning it is like, you know, a guy like me that's actually staying in a hotel for the next 4 days while we're here, laptop and this, and off I go. I mean, the world's so different to the one you and I grew up in. I mean, 90% of my life is recording one instance at a time.
Right.
You know, I may go into a studio and
Right.
track live drums, and maybe with the bass player and one rhythm instrument, either a guitar or a piano player.
Yeah.
But after that, it's vocals, it's guitar overdubs, it's bass overdubs, it's virtual instruments and stuff. So, you know, this is going to take care of 90% of those situations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Fantastic.
Also, being an interface talked with the guitar player in mind, we could not avoid supporting the reamp.
Right.
So, if you ever have tried to connect an amplifier to an audio interface,
Right.
you have seen what happens. Buzz, noise, ground loops.
Yeah,
clicks.
it feels like you're putting about 1,000 times more output into your amp than you'll ever need, yes.
Yes. Yes. So then you start needing isolators, DI boxes, impedance converters, all this stuff. Not with the Axio, because we have a specific amp output that is floating and isolated, and it's sending a perfectly matched signal to the amplifier, so that reamping here is a matter of seconds. You just connect the amplifier here to this dedicated output. From the DAW, this is output number 5.
Great.
And then you mic the amp up and you go back from the input, and that's a very straightforward process that will have no ground loop noises, no hum, buzz.
Perfect.
And it's very useful.
Tuner on the front,
Yes.
which is might sound really obvious, but it's actually a really nice feature.
It's very useful, yeah.
I know it sounds really obvious, but I have a tuner, I think, in every device that I have, whether it's my iPhone, my iPad, my laptop, my computer, whatever it is. But I'm always like scrolling through trying to find it. What was it called again? Guitar, whatever.
Yeah.
There it's just sitting on the front. And
It's very, very useful, yeah.
God bless how easy that's going to make it. There you go. And I'm a little out of tune, but hey,
Yeah.
you know.
No problem.
Aren't I always?
Also, the outputs. Of course, the inputs are very important. You need to get the best possible signal for your instruments, but then also the outputs must sound great because they are connected to the monitors, and that's where you are taking decisions for the mix. So that's why the DAC converters here are really top of the line, and allows for monitoring at a very, very high quality. So it's an interface that is designed for the guitar player, but it's really an high-end audio interface. The specs are amazing, and we really think this can be the definitive interface for the production studio, because
Are you a guitar player?
I'm a bass player.
You're a bass player?
Yeah.
Okay. Glenn? Oh, he's gone. Where's Glenn Fricker when you need him and somebody talks about a bass player? You know?
Yeah. So
So this is your baby. You designed this.
yes,
Fantastic. When did you start thinking about this? How long was the process?
almost 1 year.
A year.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I actually, it's funny because when I talked to Dave about this a few weeks ago, I was like, this has been coming up in conversation a lot recently, how, there's all the entry-level IOs, but none of them, they're all a little vague who they're for.
Yeah.
And the guitar players are a little bit left out. And the reason why I say this is because when I get beginners asking me questions, there'll be an instrument input, if you're lucky. It says the word instrument. Sometimes it will say high Z. But I still get the question, how do I plug my guitar in? You know, and now, and I know this sounds really obvious and sort of a low-level question, but if you're starting from scratch, you know, these are the things you want. You want something that's designed for you and makes you feel welcome. And of course, the obvious fact that it comes with what? So we buy the unit. What is coming with it?
There is a very, how can I say, there is a huge bundle of software that comes with the interface. There is a selection of T-Rex plugins, and of course Amplitude, that is our modeling software for all the amplifiers and effects that are typically used in a guitar setup. So yes, it comes with a lot of added value in software, and it's very high quality software. I mean,
what we've really enjoyed about using Amplitude over the years, because obviously it's been around for a long time, is how it actually blends really, really well with real amps.
Yeah.
And that makes a big deal. There's a couple that just don't work for me. They don't blend, which means, you know, I may have gone into a studio, or I may be over with Tim, and he's done a whole bunch of overdubs, and then I need to do an overdub.
Okay.
And I'm like searching for that one sound, and I've got 10 minutes.
That
I will
matches.
say that's the one thing I think is a lot of producers and engineers talk about with Amplitude, is that it sits really well with plays nicely with real tones.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can imagine the stuff that you were mentioning before, that it's not always easy to understand where to connect the guitar.
Sure.
When we started with Amplitude, back in 2001, there were no audio interfaces with the AZ input. They were not existing.
Yep.
And so people was connecting their guitar to the line inputs.
Yep.
You can imagine what was happening. The signal was destroyed, basically. So we had to teach people, because we were selling Amplitude pretty well, and we had to teach people, well, you need an IZ converter, you need a DI box.
Yep.
And then finally, the AZ input started to appear on all the interfaces, but that was not obvious at the beginning. So
I mean, to be honest, one of the big selling IOs at the moment still has that issue where they haven't quite figured out the impedance.
Okay.
It either sort of works with guitar or sort of works with keyboards. And I know that there's, and obviously we all know there's such a massive impedance issue between this and
the keyboard, yeah.
And the keyboard, yeah. So I think gearing it towards a particular group makes a lot of sense. And despite the rumors to the contrary, the guitar is going nowhere. I mean, you go to YouTube now. I mean, how many YouTube channels are there with guitar players? I mean, it's insane. I think just because Gibson may not be selling 1 million Les Pauls a day doesn't mean it's dying.
No.
You know, I feel the exact opposite. I see the growth in guitar playing is absolutely enormous. And I think for a lot of these legacy companies, like Gibson, is that the problem is they don't understand they're competing against themselves. If I wanted to buy a Les Paul, there's a market now of about 10,000 used ones. So I think guitar playing is growing so amazingly. I mean, even things like this, an Indonesian guitar which plays phenomenally, and then you're giving them tools to make music.
Yep.
Great work. Great work. What else comes with it outside of the guitar stuff? Is there other tools for people for music production?
That are coming with the Axio?
Yep.
Yes, there are plugins from T-Rex that are great mix and mastering plugins, audio processors, so equalizers, dynamic processing, reverbs, delays, this kind of stuff. So really,
how much? Which ones? Is it like a? Is that a Dave question?
I think you can select them.
Okay.
And so everything that's come with this, once you get this box, you connect it to the computer, install all the included software, and then you have a complete studio.
That's great.
It's there.
Hey,
also
Daniel, are you able to show us some of the stuff that comes with it? Yes. Some of the studio stuff? Answer that question for us.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big T-Rex fan. I've been using T-Rex, I think
since the original
like
version.
2001, 2000? Yeah.
That was the original one.
Yeah.
The standalone one.
Yeah, and I still use it on the master bus.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course. So yes, as far as we were actually talking about some of the recording stuff, but obviously, yeah, there is a huge amount of other things.
You also have T-Rex that comes with interface.
But what I've loved about some of the quote unquote emulations is that you've done some really hyped things. What I mean is recently we've been doing some mixing. We've been doing like live streaming to people, and I wanted to go and use an 1176, and I'm in Pro Tools, so everybody knows a bomb factory, which is very transparent, quite frankly. It just sounds like a thing. But what we love about 1176s is the fact that they add a little crunch.
Right.
But that crunch can be subtle, let's be honest. And you go to, I've been to 1,000 studios, guys like Dave have been to 1,000 studios, and every 1176 sounds different.
It's different, yeah.
Totally different.
Yeah.
What I like about yours is really hyped. Yours is like the 1176 on steroids. It's like you put a signal into it and it crunches, and it does what you want it to do. There's plenty of other 1176 or other compressors that can be really sterile and, generic.
I think that's because whenever we do an emulation of any kind, like this is the 1176, we start off schematics, as everybody's doing, I hope, but we do that.
Yep.
And then we build a mathematical model of what the schematics is doing. And I think some of the competitors are stopping there.
Right.
We are going on from there, starting listening to the model, starting the way it reacts to music. And if it's not right, on that regard, we modify it, because it means that, of course, always A being with the original one aside.
Sure.
If the original one has more vibe for some reasons, we don't care if the model is correct. We must get to that vibe somehow. And so
for me, I felt like what you guys were doing was you were finding what was good about it and like giving it an extra notch.
an extra more, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit more.
Probably because when we are in this process, we tend to exaggerate a bit, but that's nice because it gives much more color from a digital emulation. That is what people are searching for when they open this compressor.
Yeah, that's the one. That sounds like the 1176 on steroids.
Yeah.
It's got what you inherently love about 1176, which is the crunchiness, which was what, if I think to me, any classic guitar sound would be an SM57 in front of the Celestion going through a 1073 into an 1176.
That's done, yeah.
That's the guitar sound that we all grew up listening to.
Yeah.
And we inherently love that little extra grit that it brings in.
It could even be that we modeled one that was more crunchy than the average.
Good.
And but anyway, that phase that we had about the trimming by ear and checking if the vibe is the same typically brings more vibe than what there is in the original.
Well, the mix I was using on recently, I realized I didn't have to use an EQ now.
Okay.
So I was like, there it is. What I want comes in one plugin.
Yeah, that's also because there is a lot of harmonic saturation in there, so it's enhancing all the harmonics and making the material to come more upfront without the need of equalization. That's the 1176. I mean, it's...
Yep, that's its characteristics.
Yeah.
When did you start doing this?
We started in 96.
96?
Yeah.
And you were there from the beginning?
From the beginning, yes.
Nice.
Yes. Quite nice, yeah.
Now, with the T-Rex, there's no modeling on it.
The original one?
I'm talking about the original T-Rex. There's no, I don't look at it and go, that sounds like this sounds like that. What did you use to get to that point?
Yeah, that was we could call an hybrid modeling, because we were taking stages from classic devices and putting them together to create the processing we needed. The equalizer there was taken from a Calrec desk.
I love Calrec.
The UA 8000. It was the production/broadcasting console. So the equalizer was taken for that, and then we adjusted the bells and the shape of the shelves to be more suitable for mastering, because that was a channel equalizer, of course. The compressor was taken from the schematics of a Fairchild 670. Then we analyzed the real unit, and we found that we needed to modify a bit to be more suitable to what the software was called to do in its wall processing, because it was a fixed patch, a fixed set of processor software.
What about the clipper? Because
clipper,
as far as I'm concerned, maybe somebody would disagree with me, I think you were the first guys to do a clipper that was usable. And I still use it.
That's nice to hear.
Yeah. Because, clippers now are really common. In fact, it's like the de rigueur hip new plugin. Everybody's got a clipper coming out. Your clippers...
I think that is because back in '98, nobody was caring about aliasing in digital. No. And if you do a clipping, you got aliasing back.
Yeah.
I think that the reason for this is that that clipping was anti-aliased back in '98, and so it was sounding analog, basically. There was a knob to adjust the hardness of the clip from very hard, straight clipping to very, very soft. But the process was running upsampled, and so there was no aliasing, or very, very low amount of aliasing. So maybe that's why people started using clipping a lot in mastering, digital, I mean. Because it was not sounding like, you know, nails on a window.
Sure.
And I think the reason was that it was not aliasing.
Right.
And then we had a multi-band limiter in that.
Oh, it's fantastic, yeah.
That was a completely original design, not modeled after anything, to try to make something that was properly complementing the other two models that were before, that were very analog sounding, very round and very enhancing. And so the multi-band limiter was really just a surgical device to control the three bands after the colored first two models. Yeah.
I honestly, these guys hear me wax on it about it lyrically. I think the original T-Rex is still stands up to this day as one of the best things out there. Yeah.
That's very great to hear.
When I was mixing in the box in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I first discovered T-Rex, I used to start putting it on my master bus all the time.
Okay.
And when I sent it out for mastering, people would go, "Oh, Warren, I could tell you were mixing this onto tape."
Oh, wow.
It was so... everything else that I was using, like what was the other one that was really trendy? The TC Electronics one? The grey-blue one?
Yeah.
It just sounded... It had that little digital crunch to it, and T-Rex came out, and it was like, oh. Yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, hey, it's nice to talk to the guy that designed it when I've been using it for nearly 20 years.
Thank you very much, Warren.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have, what's our time like, David? We're done? I got the... All right. You've done enough damage for tonight, Warren. Yeah. I think actually it's the death metal band playing in the next room.
Yeah.
It's the Icelandic death metal band.
Some low end coming through.
Thank you, David. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay! It's great.